Welcome back. So this next video lecture is on the topic of romantic love and relationships. One thing you might notice after reading the articles I've assigned on this topic is that there aren't very many controlled scientific studies investigating the phenomenon of love. That's probably because it's difficult to bring love into the laboratory and study it systematically. Indeed, there's so many different psychological processes that come into play when people fall in love. Emotional processes, biological processes, the attachment mechanism, psychological needs like belonging and existential security, and so on. So perhaps that's why there's so much mystery surrounding the idea of love and why we're so fascinated by it. Because it's really hard to tease all these processes apart. So as such, in addition to scientific data, we should also look to poets, artists, musicians, and filmmakers to get a sense of what's really meant by the idea of love. So let's use that as our starting place. Okay, so the first article I assigned was by a psychologist named Kenneth Pope. And in this article, Pope lays out the various conceptualizations of romantic love that have occurred over the course of history, especially as described in art and literature. One of these conceptualizations is that love is like a disease. This idea can be found in much of the classic literature. Love comes over us like a mental disorder characterized by obsession with another person, anxiety and mood swings ranging from euphoria to depression. In fact, in the beginning phases, love looks a lot like something like bipolar disorder, or maybe something even more debilitating. On page 4 of that article, Pope defines romantic love as a preoccupation with another person, a deeply felt desire to be with the loved one, a feeling of incompleteness without him or her, thinking of the loved one often, whether together or apart. Separation frequently provokes feelings of genuine despair or else tantalizing anticipation of reuniting. And reunion is seen as bringing feelings of euphoric ecstasy or peace and fulfillment. A second conceptualization is that love has regressive properties. This regression may come in two forms. First, it's like reverting back to a kind of childlike state, having puppy love or infatuation, where people have pet names for each other like Sweetie Pie, Honey Muffin, Snookums, and Snuggle Bunny. The second way love is regressive is more Freudian. That is Freud's notion of the Oedipus or Electra complex, where we're trying to find mommy or daddy in a love partner. Yikes. A third conceptualization is that love involves an obsessive preoccupation with another person, where the love object consumes our attention. And a fourth related idea is that when people are in love, there is energetic involvement between them that engages the mind and body. It's like an intimate fusing of two people in which other people are excluded when people are in the act of falling in love. The third and fourth conceptualizations, as I suggested, are kind of similar in that they both involve an obsessive-like focus on one another, where like public displays of affection in which two lovers ignore everything around them and just focus on one another. I always think of that famous photo that was taken of the couple that was kissing on the ground in the middle of the street during the Vancouver riots. Do you guys remember that? I think it was in 2011. The Vancouver Canucks had just lost Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals to the Boston Bruins, and in reaction to that loss, riots broke out in Vancouver. And during all the chaos, this couple was caught on film, ignoring the surrounding chaos, holding each other tight to feel safe, and kissing each other. So it's like a moment of romance that was captured on film that represents some of these conceptualizations of love where two people are totally focused on one another. A fifth conceptualization is that love exposes us and makes us feel vulnerable. Love makes us feel vulnerable both at the symbolic level and at the physical level. Symbolically, when you get to know somebody at an intimate level, you have to reveal unpleasant things about yourself and hope that you will be accepted. And the same is true for the other person. In other words, you both have to reveal things about yourself that you're not proud of, like a previous failed marriage, an annoying habit, or some other failure that you're really embarrassed to talk about and share with other people. Okay. At the physical level, you also become aware of each other as animals and aware of your own animality at the same time. In other words, once you start spending a lot of time with someone, especially once you start sleeping with someone, it's impossible to avoid the uncomfortable fact that both of you are animals with the same biological processes that all other animals have, like farting, belching, menstruating, defecating, urinating, snot blowing, and so on. And all of this makes us feel vulnerable because we have to hope that our animality or our creatureliness won't be perceived as offensive and a turnoff to the other person. But once you accept each other's creatureliness, then that can eventually lead to greater intimacy, but it's hard to get past that point. One last conceptualization of love is that it undermines our need for control and individuality. When a person merges with someone else in a romantic relationship, there's the concern that one may lose their sense of self and their sense of control. Thus, sometimes people remain emotionally detached in relationships. So one example of this comes from the film we watch in this class, Husbands and Wives, specifically the scene where Sally and Michael sleep together for the first time, and Sally is unable to orgasm because during the act of sex she can't turn off her intellect and just be present in the moment. So she gets into her own head and starts thinking about how people can be categorized as foxes or hedgehogs, which refers to a way of categorizing philosophers. But that part's irrelevant. The point that Woody Allen is trying to make in this scene is that this kind of intellectualizing during sex is really an avoidance of intimacy due to the fear of losing one's sense of control and selfhood by merging with another person. So many of these different conceptualizations of love bring us back to Becker's ideas, which can be found in chapter 8 of his book, The Denial of Death, which I've assigned for you guys to read. So let's talk about that chapter. In it, Becker describes what he calls the romantic solution. So what exactly does he mean by that? Well, he explains that with the waning of religion as the dominant source of security in modern times, people have had to find a replacement for their security, one that provides a similar kind of transcendent meaning, and this, according to Becker, is what romantic love provides. Now, to be sure, religion and romantic love have always been in competition with each other, but in modern times, religion has clearly waned as the dominant worldview, especially in Western culture. People are certainly still religious, but not nearly as steadfastly devoted as in the old times, like back in the 17th century, before the Enlightenment. So the idea here is that, for better or worse, no pun intended, romantic love has become the new religion. Think about how many popular songs are about romantic love. I listed a few just at the top of this slide to give you a sense of that. It just feels like in our culture, through the media, we're constantly bombarded with the idea that romantic love is the answer to all of our problems. Becker also makes the point that romantic love is essentially transference. At least in the early stages, lovers tend to blow one another up as if they're bigger than life, almost giving them a kind of divine status. We see our new lover as perfect and infallible, just like how we saw our parents as powerful and godlike when we were children. Then we feel a sense of personal value and self-esteem by merging with and being connected to our lover, right? Our transference object. Then over time, romantic relationships are transformed into a mini two-person hero system, or like a cosmology of two. So the romantic solution also helps us deal with the problem of death by providing a basis for procreation and the production of offspring, or children, which are forms of symbolic immortality. So our children are kind of like these mini-me's that look and act like us to some extent and and ultimately carry on our legacy. So, like religion, romantic love provides an avenue for transcending death. Okay, however, Becker also points out that there are at least two main problems with the romantic solution. First, romantic love is too fleeting to be a stable source of transcendent meaning. Just like any cult leader, people are concrete, fallible objects that let us down. And people can either die or leave us, which can be devastating. Indeed, consider that in our culture, the divorce rate is roughly 50%. So if your partner is your main source of security, and there's a 50% chance that that person might leave you, or that you might leave them, then that's not a very stable source of security. The second problem is that sex and surrender to our physical body is a reminder of our finitude. In other words, sex is of the body, and the body is of death. Thus, when we make ourselves vulnerable in the act of sex, over time, once the excitement and novelty of a new sex partner wears off, the creaturely aspects of sex become more salient. Once this happens, sex increasingly becomes a reminder of our animal nature and our finitude. Right? A reminder that we're trapped in a physical body that's doomed to decay and die. The salience of our animal nature through sex, therefore, tends to undercut the transcendent meaning that the romantic solution is meant to provide. Okay, so as usual, Becker's analysis is rather dark and not very comforting. So let's talk about another article I assigned, which is more optimistic. The article by Csikszentmihalyi, who I'm just going to call CK for short. His article is called Love and the Dynamics of Personal Growth. So according to CK, love is an emergent motivation. CK acknowledges that love is founded upon the satisfaction of biological needs, the sex drive, that is, and is motivated by evolved mechanisms that make us attracted to certain physical characteristics like, breasts and nice hips and symmetrical faces and so on. However, it can't be reduced to this drive state alone. CK argues that love has irreducible emergent properties. Okay, so why does he say this? His argument is that exposure to a very complex stimulus, such as another person, opens one up to a host of other needs, motivations, activities, and desires that become reinforcing for reasons that may have little to do with sex, even though this may have been the original motivating force. When this happens, love is kind of like a new ballgame. Relationships can become a genuine growth experience because they provide the opportunity for feelings, thoughts, goals, and desires that one would not have otherwise. Okay, so what is the evidence for CK's view of romantic love as an emergent motivation? Well, it's the basic observation that when a man meets a woman, instinct theories go out the window. Once again, CK acknowledges that love is founded on a biological drive to procreate and on the attachment mechanism built into primates to ensure that offspring are protected by a caregiver. However, there's wide-ranging flexibility in sexual attraction. People fall in love for an infinite number of different reasons: the shape of a nose, the way a person treats you, sharing a particular hobby, a belief or a value, validating you as a hero, and so on. Therefore, there must be more to love than just biologically programmed instincts, because people fall in love for all kinds of different reasons. CK's main point is that love provides opportunities for growth and enrichment that are experienced as enjoyment or flow. Flow is described as an enjoyable mental state that emerges when one is engaged in a task that is challenging and engaging. When two people grow together in a relationship, they challenge one another and have new experiences together, which creates the opportunity for flow, passion, and excitement. All right, so with all these ideas in mind that we've been discussing, I want to present to you a general theory of love. The theory goes like this. Simply put, relationships serve both growth and security needs. In other words, people have a basic need to feel safe and secure, and we also have a basic need for passion, growth, and exploration. The notion that we possess these two basic needs should remind you of another psychological mechanism that has come up repeatedly in this course, and that is the attachment mechanism. So just to review, remember from earlier in the course that as vulnerable infants, we all start out with the basic drive towards survival, right? To feel safe and secure. And we also have a basic drive to explore our environment. These two needs tend to oppose one another such that feeling too safe and secure inhibits exploration, which is necessary for learning and adapting to one's environment. And on the other hand, too much exploration takes us away from mom and dad, right? Takes us away from our secure base, which exposes us to dangers and therefore threatens our survival. The attachment mechanism evolved to keep these two needs in balance. As infants, when we get too far away from mom and dad, or in the presence of cliffs and strangers, we experience innate fear, which prompts proximity seeking to mom and dad. Once reunited with mom and dad, we feel safe enough to explore our environment. Okay, so maybe romantic relationships are an extension of this original attachment mechanism into adult life. If so, then to the extent that a romantic relationship provides us with a good balance of security and opportunities for growth and passion, that relationship will last longer and be more satisfying. In other words, relationships that meet our needs for safety and growth and enrichment will be the most successful. Okay, let's talk about how these needs can influence relationships in the short run. In the beginning of any dating relationship, there is lots of excitement and passion, but relatively low levels of security. When you first start dating someone, you aren't totally sure if you can trust the person yet. Do they really like me? Or are they just using me for sex? What happens when they meet my family? Will they still like me? And so on. So there's lots of uncertainties and insecurities that we have. This means that the relationship in the early stages is out of balance. Okay? This leads to at least two hurdles that couples must get past if the relationship is going to continue. The first hurdle then is just letting your guard down. Two people have to eventually make themselves vulnerable to one another to get a sense of trust and security established. If this never happens, the relationship might fizzle and fade away and never get going. The second hurdle is putting too much emphasis on passion and growth in the beginning stages. An intense physical relationship often leads to a feeling of emotional attachment with another person that isn't necessarily based on having anything real in common. So if there's too much passion too early in a relationship, this can lead to a kind of false sense of security, and then down the road, one or both people might realize that they're not as compatible as they thought, but then once that emotional attachment gets going, because of the intense physical passion, it's very hard to change course. Kind of like the old song, breaking up is hard to do. Okay, let's talk about how these needs influence relationships in the long run. The first problem with long-term relationships is, and it's a big one, the stifling of growth and stimulation. In every long-term relationship, once you've been with someone for years and years, familiarity sets in and the passion fades. So when this happens, the relationship is once again out of balance because, while there may be high levels of security in a long-term committed relationship, there's less likely to be passion and excitement. The characters Jack and Sally in the film Husbands and Wives are the prototypical example of this common problem. In fact, that's why Woody Allen gave them the common names of Jack and Sally, because the issue that they face is what every single couple in a long-term marriage relationship will eventually face. Two people eventually get bored with each other, and they're tempted by other partners that offer novelty and excitement. This problem relates to what is sometimes called the Coolidge effect, named after former U.S. President Calvin Coolidge. It's based on the following story, which might be true, but I haven't been able to verify it yet. The story goes like this. When touring a government-run experimental farm, the president's wife was really impressed by the untiring sexual activity of one rooster in the henhouse. You might point that out to Mr. Coolidge, she told the farmer. Upon hearing the remark from the farmer, President Coolidge asked the farmer whether a different hen was involved each time. When informed that that was true, he replied, "You might point that out to Mrs. Coolidge." So the point is that all creatures, humans, rats, dogs, and toads, and so on, tend to have reduced sexual desire for the same partner over time. There's no easy solution to this, it's just the way it is. And so people need to find creative solutions to this problem. One of these creative solutions might be to metaphorically take the hen to a new farm. So this brings us to a couple of other concepts in social psychology. One I think I talked about earlier in this course is Zillman's excitation transfer theory, which just says that conscious awareness of one's arousal dissipates more quickly than the actual arousal. So after being aroused, there's always some residual arousal that's left over that can be attributed to some other source. So engaging in novel activities together that are arousing can create arousal that can then be, at least in the moment, attributed to each other in the relationship. And sometimes that can sort of get the passion going again. A second thing is to find and sustain mutual interests together. So find new hobbies and activities that you can do together that you're both intrinsically interested in. For example, golf, skydiving, even bird watching for some people can be a real hoot. Oh, that was bad. However, this works best when two people are both independently interested in the same thing, right? So if one person is interested in bird watching and the other one isn't, but goes along with it just for the sake of making the other person happy, then that doesn't work as well, right? So it's important for both people to be intrinsically interested in those activities. The point is that two people need to continue to grow as individuals so that they remain exciting to one another. The second main problem in long-term relationships is that if you're with someone for many, many years, eventually life is going to throw both of you a curveball. In other words, you will eventually encounter major problems that threaten the security of the relationship. Relationships provide security needs, but sometimes their ability to meet these needs can be challenged by difficulties people face in relationships, such as a death in the family, loss of a job, a serious illness, or perhaps jealousy. So how can the security of the relationship be maintained in the face of such challenges? Well, there's no easy solutions, but here are a few guiding principles. First of all, continue to have realistic expectations of one another. Don't expect your partner to be perfect in all aspects, or you will inevitably be let down. We are all fallible and imperfect, so cut each other some slack. A second guiding principle is just to communicate about problems. This might seem like the kind of advice your grandmother would give you, like, the key is communication, sweetie. But it is good advice, and so I'll repeat what your grandma has already told you. Inequities always arise in relationships over time, such that what one person thinks they're getting out of the relationship and what they think they're putting into it doesn't match up evenly. When problems like this arise, the person who feels deprived might not bring it up because people tend to avoid confrontation. They don't want to rock the boat or cause further problems. So one person might just grin and bear it, or maybe they'll just drop subtle hints about the inequity and hope the other person figures it out on their own, which of course never happens. As a result, the problem festers, animosity and resentment builds into contempt for the other person, and eventually that leads to a bigger divide between the two of you. So the key is to communicate about such inequities as soon as they arise, and to do it in a way that doesn't put the other person on the defensive. A third thing to keep in mind is that once you enter into a relationship, whether or not, you've sort of agreed to be a transference object and a hero for that other person. In a relationship, each partner needs to be able to maintain an image of the other as a kind of mini hero, or someone that'll step up for the other when the going gets tough. Each person needs to feel validated as a hero by the other person. Let me give you an example. Eventually your partner will lose his or her parents to aging and death. When this happens, you'll need to step up and be there for your partner, which means taking time off work to attend a funeral or something like that. If you're unable or unwilling to do these types of things during times of great distress for your partner, then your partner might not be able to maintain an image of you in his or her mind as a hero in the cosmology of two that you've built up together over the years. If that happens, trust will be eroded and the relationship could be jeopardized. I've actually observed this dynamic among other couples, and that eventually led to divorce. Okay, one final point is that both of these problems, the stifling of growth and stimulation and threats to the security of the relationship, can feed off of one another in at least two main ways. First of all, when the security of a relationship is threatened, that is, there's hidden resentment and lack of validation for one another as a hero within the relationship, then two people will start to distance from one another and they won't have sex or spend as much time together, which affects the potential for passion and growth within the relationship. The other way is that when there's a lack of passion and growth in a relationship, the two people may begin to wonder if the love is gone. Or worse yet, one person might cheat on another one in order to find that passion, which of course undermines the security, that is, trust of the relationship. Okay, so last but not least, I want to go over one more article that I had you read by Dragotis, Whitney, and Rusbolt that presents a taxonomy of the different reactions people have to dissatisfaction in their relationships. It's called the Evelyn model because the four reactions are called exit, voice, loyalty, and neglect, which sort of spells Evelyn. The idea is that when dissatisfactions arise in relationships, couples deal with those problems in at least four broad ways, which has fairly predictable effects on the quality of the relationship. Okay, so this slide shows a diagram of the model. All of this information is in the article, so be sure to read it, but here's a brief overview of the different typologies. The first one is exit, which is active but destructive to the relationship and is defined as separating, actively abusing a partner, threatening to leave, or screaming shrewishly at a partner. So for example, in the beginning of the film, husbands and wives, Jack and Sally use the exit strategy, though more calmly than it's defined here. Whereas toward the end of the film, when Jack and Sally realize they still need each other, they use voice as they try to work through their issues. So in comparison to Gabe and Judy, Jack and Sally are clearly more on the active side of the diagram in the strategies they choose as a couple. The next one is voice, which is active and also constructive to the relationship and is defined as discussing problems, seeking help from a friend or therapist, suggesting solutions, changing oneself, or attempting to change a partner. The next one is loyalty, which is passive but still constructive to the relationship and is defined as praying for improvement, supporting a partner in the face of criticism, and continuing to wear symbols of the relationship like a ring or a locket. I mentioned above that Jack and Sally used the more active strategies of exit and voice. However, you could argue that, at least for a time, Sally used loyalty in her reaction to Jack's infidelity, which was actually more passive. Okay, and then the last one is neglect, which is passive and also destructive to the relationship, and is defined as letting things fall apart, ignoring a partner or spending less time together, criticizing a partner for things unrelated to the problem. Okay, so as you think about the Evelyn typologies, when you're applying them to the relationships that you saw in the film Husbands and Wives, there's some important points to think about in how you apply them. Okay, so let me go over some of those. The first point is that the constructiveness or destructiveness of the strategy refers to the impact of a response to the relationship, not one of the individual persons in the relationship. So in other words, the relationship itself is the unit of analysis, not each individual person in the relationship. So for example, exit is good for the individual if one is in an abusive relationship, but would still be considered destructive for the relationship overall. Okay, a second point is that activity or passivity refers to whether a response directly influences the immediate situation, but does not refer to the character of the behavior itself. So for example, walking to a bar to avoid discussing an issue is technically active on the surface, but would still be considered passive according to the Evelyn model because the person is not dealing with the real issue in the relationship. Third, neglect and loyalty are both passive, but neglect is more visible than loyalty because it's negative. Negative behaviors tend to stand out more than positive behaviors, so neglect has more of an impact on the relationship than does loyalty. And a fourth point is that loyalty is clearly a positive response, but it's ambiguous, passive, and less visible. Therefore, acts of loyalty have less impact on the relationship overall. And finally, the beneficial effects of loyalty can be increased by increasing its visibility. For example, if you're praying for someone, then tell them, "I'm praying for you." When people hear this, they often think, well, doesn't having to tell someone that you're doing something loyal kind of take away from it because it comes off as manipulative? And that's true, it could come off as manipulative depending on how you inform the person of your loyalty. Like, see, I support you, why don't you support me? Or choosing to tell the person about your loyalty during an argument. But I think there are times when the other person simply needs to know that you're engaged in the relationship and that you still care about them. Also, people are not always great at mind reading or picking up on subtle cues, so instead of assuming that the other person should notice certain things that you've done, why not just tell the person? Mentioning that you acted out of loyalty to the relationship at the right time can be really good for the relationship, and it might actually help you get what you need out of the relationship. So like if it's really important to you that your partner acknowledges work that you've done around the house, which usually goes unnoticed, then why not be proactive in getting what you need by communicating those acts of loyalty to your partner?